This is the Hand Engraving Podcast, the world's greatest podcast dedicated to the art and artists of hand engraving. I'm your host, Wade Oliver Wilson, Master Engraver. From the beginning, I've tried to get the very best engravers to be guests on my show. I've managed to get a lot of them. Scheduling didn't work out with some, and a few have refused to come on. But, for the most part, everything has worked out nicely, and I thank everyone who trusted me to get your story out there into the world. If I made a list of interviews I'd most like to record, today's guest would be right at the very top. No other engraver has had a larger impact on hand engraving, while being virtually unknown as a person. He lived nearly 200 years ago, in a time without electric lights, indoor plumbing, or computers. But he kept records of his work, and those records survive to this day. Through these records, and through the records kept by the state of New York, and by the census records of the United States, I would like to add some detail to this man's biography that have not been known until now. I want to introduce you to the man behind the name, Louis Daniel Nimschke.
Are we all set?
We are.
Okay, folks. We're in for a real treat today. This is someone that I've always wanted to interview, and I bet you don't know much about him either. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, please?
My name is Louis Daniel Nimschke, and I'm an engraver from New York City.
Well, I'm so happy you're here. Just right off the bat, one of the very first things I learned about you is that your name isn't Louis, it's actually Ludwig.
Yeah, that's right. Ludwig and Louis are the same name. I just used the Americanized version of it.
Well, I don't suppose that's too unusual. Your friend Gustav Jung, of course, Americanized his name as well. The reason I wanted to have you on the show is because, of course, whether you know it or not, you're one of the most influential engravers in American history, which is kind of funny because you're one of the engravers that we know the least about. The reason we know about you is because a book of your smoke pools has come forward through time and was published in 1965 and has influenced untold numbers of engravers since then. Of course, everything that I know about you is just through data points that I was able to find online. And so I thought maybe you and I could sit and round out some of these things and maybe give kind of an idea of what Mr. Nimschke was all about. So the very first data point we have for you is that you were born in a village called Schleitz, which is kind of in the eastern side of Germany. Is there anything you can tell us about that?
Yeah, Schleitz is actually in Thüringen. Thüringen is pretty much in the center of Germany now. When I was born, it was part of the Großherzogtum from Saxon. Yeah, but things were changing in Europe. Kingdoms and principalities were being to be incorporated into nations. The Protestant, the Reformation, had its beginning in Thüringen. Johann Sebastian Bach was from there. Goethe was from there. And Ludwig Daniel Nimschke, me, was also from there.
Very good. Well, I'm glad you mentioned all that because I can find absolutely nothing about your younger years. We know that you went to a city called Suhl, where they had the, let me get this straight, the Berufsschule for Buchsenmacher und Gravur in Suhl, Germany.
Yeah, that's right.
And then from there you went and you apprenticed under Ernst Moritz in a smaller town called Zella-Mehlis.
Zella-Mehlis, yes.
Zella-Mehlis, excuse me.
Zella-Mehlis.
Your book starts in 1850 when you're 18, but most engravers started before that, so I'm not 100% sure what that 1850 number means. There are many other famous engravers from Suhl at this time.
There are other famous engravers?
Yeah, of course there are. Erfurt was a large city. Suhl was a smaller city, but almost entirely made of gun manufacturing. And then Zella-Mehlis was even smaller. And like I said, that's where you were apprenticed under Ernst Moritz. So there were other engravers that came up through these areas, and I assume you knew some of them, and they all ended up in America, just like you. Some of the names are Gustav Jung, Charles Barthelmess, and John Marr. They seem to have come over the year before you did, and they all studied under Ernst Moritz in Zelle-Mehlis. In the book, Cult Factory Engravers of the 19th Century, the author Herbert Hauss suggested that some of the engravers left Germany to avoid being conscripted into the army. He also said that Samuel Colt had been advertising that he was looking for engravers to come and work at his new factory in Hartford, Connecticut. Why did you come to America?
Yeah, that is true. There was an uprising at the time, and many young men were being conscripted into the army, and perhaps had something to do with me leaving for America. It's also possible that as a young man, I just wanted to get out and see the world. I can't tell you for sure.
Well, I was hoping for a more definite answer, but I guess we'll just never know the answer to that. Like I said, some of the artists left the year before and went to work for Colt. And this was kind of an interesting time in history because transportation was changing. Germany had a railway system at this time, and transatlantic travel had become cheaper. So you existed really at the perfect time to come to the United States. How did your trip start?
Well, I must have gone to the coast. Bremen was a popular port to departure, and so maybe I went there. Like you said, there was a limited railway system in Germany at the time. Maybe I took that. Maybe I took a coach. Who can say?
Well, I was hoping that you could tell me, but I'll take whatever answers I can get. This is part of your trip that I just don't have any records for. So what can we really say?
Well, I boarded the ship. I don't know the name. And I sailed to England to await my departure in Liverpool.
Well, this is where your story actually begins. This is where we have proof of you. We do know that you left Liverpool aboard the ship, the Charles Crooker. Your ship departed for America on a Thursday. It encountered a storm on Friday. And by Saturday, the captain sailed the ship to Belfast to put into port for repairs.
It was awful. Everyone was seasick. The crew would not give us water or food. They forced us to man the pumps and then beat us when we faltered. We were all sure we would die. How did you know about this?
When your ship arrived in Belfast, many of the passengers complained about the conditions aboard ship being subpar and dangerous. This led to a court case, which was reported in the Belfast newsletter, and here are some excerpts.
These are clippings from the Belfast newsletter, October 28th, 1853. All right, this first clipping is a letter from the captain of the Charles Crooker, Mr. Benjamin Delano. In this letter, he answers the complaints that have been made about the condition of the ship and the crew. It looks to me like a man trying to get ahead of a scandal. His main contention is that if the ship had not been suitable for the voyage, then they wouldn't have been allowed to leave Liverpool. Regarding the treatment of the passengers, he claims that his crew did everything they could for the people on board. Here is a reporting of the court case that was tried later that week. This passenger claims that there was not sufficient room aboard ship and that he was made to sleep on top of boxes or to find himself someplace else to lay. He also says that the provisions were not as promised. Worst of all, he says the chief mate was drunk and that he habitually assaulted men and women on board. Here a man describes his cabin aboard ship. He says the first time he lay down that his cot broke and fell onto the person below him. Worse, he had to pay the ship's carpenter to fix it. Another complaint that was made by the passengers was that they were told they had to pay the cook to cook the food for them, even though it should have been included in the price of their ticket. There is also a discussion here about the crew refusing to man the pumps and instead forcing the passengers to do the work. Further, of the 3 pumps on board, it seems only 1 was in working condition. Finally, a passenger testified as to the lack of available drinking water and how the crew would not give any out. He also mentions a man being dragged from his cabin by his head to continue to work the pump even though he was exhausted from the time he had already spent pumping.
It was an awful time for sure. We were in Belfast for about 2 weeks while the ship was repaired and the court case was settled. Of course, the authorities found for the shipping company. They always do.
Yes, the newspapers had a record of all that, and it's a very interesting story.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed the story. I assure you it wasn't fun to live through.
Yeah, I bet that's true. So, back to your story. Ship is repaired. You set sail from Belfast on November the 6th, and 39 days later, you arrive in Staten Island. You lived such a long time ago, almost 200 years ago. It's kind of hard to wrap my modern mind around what it must have been like. Steam power existed, but it wasn't used for transatlantic travel yet. You went across on a 3-masted sailing ship. We know from the records that 415 people left from England aboard that ship, but only 375 sailed from Belfast. So it sounds like a lot of people had had enough by the time you all had gotten to Ireland. Did this rough passage put you off international travel?
Well, there's no evidence that I ever sailed again, but that doesn't mean that it didn't happen.
Right. Well, we'll get to that in a second. So December 15th, 1853, you arrive in Staten Island, and then on the 16th, you're in Manhattan. I had originally thought you went through Castle Gardens, but I've since found out Castle Gardens didn't even come into existence until 2 years after this. And so I suppose immigration was just done right there on the dock. We have records of all this, and so now your paper trail continues. What did you think of Manhattan?
On assumes, I found it to be very large and very crowded, perhaps even overwhelming. Also, it was mid-December, so probably it was very cold too, but who can say?
Yeah, who can say? I can't find any record of your earliest days in New York, but I think that might be because I think you left for Hartford, Connecticut almost immediately. Our next data point for you has you listed as an engraver in Hartford living in a boarding house at 15 Mulberry Street, a location and street that no longer exists. We know that you engraved for Colt, but it looks like it was a very short stay because by February 1855, you were already back in New York and declaring your intention to become a citizen of the United States. We have paperwork proof of that as well. I've read that Mr. Colt was a tough man to work for, long hours and harsh conditions. Is that why you only worked there for a short time?
Well, none of the engravers I knew there worked for Colt for very long. I think maybe there were better ways to make a buck.
Whatever the reason was, you left to go back to New York. There was a railway from New York to Hartford and back. I assume that's how you traveled, but it's possible you went by ship. There's no record of this trip, whether coming or going, so we'll never know. The next data point I have for you is 1859, when you became a citizen, and we have your address, and it was recorded at 174 Division Street, which is now where Seward Park is located on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Like I said, you're in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. This area is called the Bowery. I guess it was also referred to as a ghetto. There were many German immigrants living there at the time. It was one of the most densely populated areas on Earth. People lived in tenement buildings, which were family houses that had converted to tiny cramped apartments with as many as 14 people living in them. And they were as small as 300 square feet. So that's awful cramped. Here are some pictures of all that.
It's tough for me to imagine what Manhattan was like in Nimschke's time. People were packed tightly into tenement houses, tiny apartments that had to fill all the needs of the inhabitants. Here are some images from 30 to 50 years after Louis Nimschke began living in America. I don't believe much changed in that time, and I hope that these photos are at least somewhat accurate representations of life in a tenement. I believe this is the same setup Nimschke would have had. I think he would have worked in front of a window in the living room of his own apartment for most of his life. For the first 30 or 40 years, he would not have had indoor plumbing or electricity. He most likely would not have had gas lighting either. I think he probably worked under lamps and lanterns most of the time. I don't have a firm idea about what magnification he might have used, but he certainly didn't work under anything like we have today. Here are some scenes from the street on which Nimschke and his family lived for over 31 years. This is a postcard from 1905 showing Essex Street. Is this the way it looked when he lived there? I have no way of knowing. Photography was becoming more widespread in the 1870s and 80s, but I couldn't find many useful images for this story. As a modern American, the images I associate with old-time New York are all images that we've seen of the immigration during the teens and 20s. Images that look archaic and strange, but even these images must look almost modern compared to what came 50 years before.
Each apartment had a bedroom, a kitchen, and a living room, with each room serving many uses. There would only have been one window to let in light and breeze. I assume this was very different than what you're used to back in Germany.
Well, in Germany, we were not living on top of people and under people and next to people and between people. But this is how it was in America, and we made it though. Tough times and tough people.
Very good. All right, we got to take a break to pay the bills.
And now, a word from our sponsors. Back to the show.
All right, so everything fine on your end?
Yeah, cool.
So I recently watched Gangs of New York to see if I could shed any light on, what life was like in Manhattan in the 1860s. All the stuff in that movie happened very close to where you lived.
Oh, God. That movie was terrible. Leonardo DiCaprio. Same guy no matter what movie he's in. And the accents. Awful.
Well, did they get anything right about those times?
Well, some of the costumes look cool.
Yeah, that's true. Did you ever wear a big top hat?
Maybe, but who can say? You'd have to find a picture of me.
Well, I wish I had a picture of you. We'll have to get to that here in a little bit. I guess we better get back to the show. Okay, so you're a young man living in Little Germany, Kleine Deutschland, in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. You came to America when you were 21 years old, and now you're 28. And the next data point we have for you is you got married to a woman named Wilhelmina Amelie Emily Moyer. How did the two of you meet?
Who can say?
Well, look, I wish that you would say. I wish I had some of these answers. So Wilhelmina is a big question for me because she is listed as also having come from Suhl. And so I wonder, did you meet her when you were at school there? Did you meet her through an acquaintance here in the United States, through maybe a Volksverein or a shooting club, or, it's one of these big question marks. And I really wish I could discover the connection. What we do know is that Wilhelmina immigrated in 1860 and that she was living in a house in Brooklyn on DeGraw Street. That house appears in news clippings around this time, advertising for a cook and a housemaid. So it is possible that she was working for these people, or maybe her family owned the property. I couldn't find an answer, and I was hoping you could shed some light on this for me.
No.
Okay. Well, you got married June 3rd, 1860 at the Madison Street German Church, which, of course, does not exist anymore. Your address changed to 35 Essex, specifically to room 17. And this was just around the block from your place on Division Street. The two of you appear in the 1860 census, and you are listed as a cameo cutter. And as a matter of fact, that caused a lot of trouble in looking for you because at this early stage in your life, your name was almost never spelled correctly on anything. And I had been looking secondarily under engravers, and I could never find you, but I finally found you, and it was listed as a cameo cutter. And I'd like to know what that's all about.
Well, I guess I cut cameos. Who knows?
All right, well, have it your way. I was wondering, given how badly your name was misspelled in these censuses, if maybe it was just a miscommunication. Maybe I thought maybe it was possible that, maybe y'all were trying to explain to the census taker that you were an engraver and maybe Wilhelmina pointed to a cameo she was wearing or something like that. And they thought you meant that you cut cameos. But it's entirely possible you just worked as a cameo cutter. It's just not anything that anybody had ever heard before. So I found it to be an interesting data point. We know from your book that you spoke and wrote English, but maybe, in your early years here in the United States, maybe it was a little more difficult to communicate.
You will see in my book that I spoke and wrote English in a perfectly acceptable manner.
Well, I agree. As a matter of fact, I'm very impressed because it's a lot better than how I speak German.
One of the biggest obstacles in my research for this show is the fact that I don't think Nimschke's name was ever spelled the same way twice on official paperwork, first name or last name. Even when it is spelled correctly, it is usually written in ink, and when these records are scanned into the computer that they're stored, due to the vagaries of handwriting, the names don't always register as what they actually should read. Here are some of the new and exciting ways that I found his name recorded. Because of the difficulties of searching by name, I often had to search by occupation. This was usually a pretty good tactic because just like today, engravers were a rare breed. When searching by occupation wouldn't work, I resorted to searching by address and sifting through all the names in a building or sometimes in a voting ward. This is how I found our man in the 1860 and the 1870 census. I don't like to toot my own horn, but this might have been the most difficult task that I accomplished in my work. What did it gain us? In 1860, Nimschke was listed in the census as a cameo cutter. This is something that I never heard before. Could it be that he was not engraving guns at this time? Maybe he just happened to be cutting cameos that day or that week? Who knows what the answer is? I searched for evidence of this work in his book, and although there are cameo-shaped images in it, I believe these are parts of gun designs and not representative of cameos in the way that we think of them. While we're on that subject, one of the hardest things for me in this research was trying to make sure that I wasn't wishing things into reality. When you're poring over images and looking for reasons that things are the way they are, it can be difficult to stay objective, and you run the risk of convincing yourself that X definitely equals Y, when in fact, you have no idea what X might equal. Allow me to show you just such a trap. Here are some of the images found in Nimschke's book. The lady seems to be the same in all of the images. Same cheeks, same longish nose, same jawline. In my artistic life, I have often used my wife for this type of modeling. So it occurred to me that this might actually be Louis's wife, Wilhelmina. I was super excited with this because I know of no photo of the lady, and it would be interesting if this was the way that we got to know what she looked like. Well, as I was studying the idea, I noticed something a little familiar about this neck right here. Where have I seen this tilt of the head before? Yes, of course, Botticelli's Birth of Venus. So that kind of threw my idea out the window. It's a possibility that all these images are just another lady that Louis happened to have a picture of and he copied over and over. Not that it's impossible that this would be Wilhelmina Nimschke, just that I would put it as unknown. Still, it's kind of nice to think about if you're inclined to thinking about such things.
So, you got newlyweds living together. They do what newlyweds do, and soon there was a baby boy. 1862, Louis W. Nimschke is born. I always wondered, before I started this project, if you had worked at home or if you had a shop. And I believe mostly you worked from home. And from what I can tell from research is that it is likely that you had a table in front of the only window in your apartment. That would make sense. And since you had learned at Seoul, it is assumed that you stood while you engraved and that you used a hammer and chisel. Does that all sound right?
Yeah, all those things are likely.
Oh, good. Finally an answer. Very good. And in a 300 square foot apartment, your family would have always been with you, seemingly, always close by. And soon a baby girl was born, Wilhelmina Louise Nimschke. And you and Wilhelmina had another baby girl, Amelie, in 1869. Many families that lived in Kleine Deutschland had a family business, whether it was baking or dressmaking. Your family isn't listed as having any jobs in the census from this time. Your wife's occupation is listed as keeping house. So you must have been doing pretty well for yourself.
Yeah, I was an established engraver, and I made enough to support my family.
Hey, wait here. I just wanted to talk for a second about the lunacy of the names in this family. Our man, Louis D. Nimschke, married Wilhelmina, Amalie, Emil, Moyer, and they had a son named Louis W. Nimschke and two daughters, Wilhelmina Louise and Amalie Nimschke. Louis W. married a woman named Amelia Nimschke. They seem to have had two daughters whose names are not confusing to the situation. Wilhelmina Louise, however, married a man named Louis Falk because we didn't already have enough Louis. They had at least 5 kids, Louisa, William, Magnus, Lillian, and Amelia. To make things worse, there were deaths and remarriages that, when combined with misspelled names, made it almost impossible to trace what happened to any of these folks. The craziest thing is, Louisa Nimschke, late in life, married a man named Louis, and so her name became Louisa Louis, which I actually think might be the weirdest part of all my research. It was like they finally reached Louis singularity. Anyway, back to the conversation.
It's your work from this time is what is first recorded in the R.L. Wilson book that came out in 1965. And so maybe it's about time that I introduced it properly. It's called LDNimschke Firearms Engraver by R.L. Wilson. Like I said, first published in 1965. This book is how we know about you mostly. It has smoke pools of your work and is the best record of engraving from this time period of American engraving. It is full of data points, and I traced as many down as I could. Most were dead ends, of course, but some were very interesting. One interesting name was that of A.G. Genez. Mr. Genez was a gunsmith whose shop was in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, a short walk from where you lived. Here's a picture of the building with 4 men standing around. So that's an interesting data point. You also did work for Schuyler, Hartley, and Graham, and later Hartley and Graham. This was a big name in the firearms and military equipment at this time. What makes this book so great is it shows the different styles that you were able to work in, and also there's often a date associated with any of these smoke pools. And so it's really a time capsule of your work and also what was, in fashion for engraving at any given time in within the years that you were working. Your book also includes smoke pools from other artists, and that's interesting to see. And it makes it a one-of-a-kind document. And the very, very, very best part of this whole thing is that your book can be seen online for free anytime anybody wants to view it. And it's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art website. And it's high res, it's beautiful, and it's free. And I encourage everybody to go and check it out.
Well, if I knew people would want it, I would have kept even better records. Maybe I could have sold copies myself.
Like I said, I find it very interesting. And one of the most fascinating things to me was having researched your family to be able to identify which smoke pools in that book are nice little things that you had made for your family. It really shows how much you loved them.
Of course, I love my family. We lived together for nearly 40 years in a tiny apartment.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of memories for you in there. But for me, like I said earlier, it's full of data points. And closely examining some of these images here shows me just how tenderhearted you were with your family. As you can see, here are some examples of initials. Here are the initials from your wife. Here are your initials from your kids. And here's a little tag for Emma with a clover. And here are some things for your son-in-law, Louis. So I thought that was kind of a nice surprise to find. And you can find all these things if you know what you're looking for. But really, it just shows how you were just like modern day engravers. We all make nice little things for our family, don't we? Enough about your book, I guess. One of my biggest goals in researching you and to put out a show was that, one, I wanted to find a living relative, which I failed at. I'm not the best at family lineage research, but it looks like the last living relative died in 1965. But maybe I'll find somebody yet. We'll see. My other goal was to at least find one photograph of you because I had no idea what you look like. So I got in touch with Roger Bliley, who is the historian for FIGA. And he turned me on this book, Cult Engravers of the 19th Century by Herbert G. Howes. And he has this picture of you. Is this you?
Well, sure could be.
Well, it claims to be from a private collection, so I assume it is you. Everything else in the book seems legit, and so I don't know why he wouldn't have done his research with this. So I'm just going to say that this is a picture of you, and it's nice to see your face. While we're talking about pictures, let's go back to Mr. Genez's shop, and I believe this dark-haired fellow right here is you. You got apron, arm gaiters. He's clearly dressed for a day's work. Is that you? What do you say?
Oh, it certainly looks like the fellow from the other picture.
Well, I happen to agree with you. Look at this side-by-side comparison. Look how everything lines up. Look at the hairline, the beard style. I think it's you. And if my research accomplishes nothing else, I would be satisfied to know that I had identified a second photograph of you. But who knows? Perhaps I'm wrong.
You should really get out of your house and go for a walk, lining up mustaches.
Well, it's important to me. And how cool would it be if this is actually a picture of the Louis Nimschke?
Well, pretty cool, I guess. I did look like a pretty stout dude.
So it was you.
I'm not saying that.
All right.
As I said, obtaining a photograph of Nimschke was one of my main goals in making this show. I decided that if I could not find a living relative, and I could not find a photograph of Nimschke, that I wouldn't go forward with the project. Little did I know that a photo of him had been out there this whole time in Mr. House's book. Less than an hour after seeing this image of Nimschke, I ran smack into this other image, which I firmly believe is also him. But let's have a look at it. Here is the man himself, and here are two photos of his son that were taken in the 20s or 30s that I got from a newspaper. I think the resemblance is pretty clear. For instance, have a look at this eye. The similarity is unquestionable. To me, this makes it clear that these men are who we think they are, Louis D. and Louis W. Nimschke. Now, let's look at the Genez photo. Although the heads are in different orientations, I believe that when the images are brought into scale with each other, that the alignments of the different features show that this must be the same person. Am I wishing this into existence? Honestly, I don't think so. But you may judge for yourself. What would it mean if this were Louis Nimschke standing on the front porch of A.G. Genez's shop? Well, I think it would prove that at least for one day Louis was working outside his apartment, and that occasionally Nimschke may have worked outside of his home. I've done the same, and I bet many engravers have too. We don't know what the situation was, but I do find newspaper clippings from this era that show Mr. Genez looking for shop help, specifically gunsmiths. So, is this Nimschke? I personally believe it is.
Moving on. In 1863, the Union Army institutes a draft in New York City, and I could not find any evidence that you were drafted. There were riots around these drafts, and it was covered in the movie Gangs of New York.
Great movie.
All right. Well, all of that happened pretty close to where you lived. We don't know if you were involved or not, but I suspect that you weren't.
Let's say I wasn't.
In 1870, your family moved from 35 Essex to 1 Essex Street, which is just up the block. And we have photos of this building from 1903. So I don't know if this is the same one you lived in or not. I assume it is, but who knows?
Does it matter?
Well, census records show you living here with your family. And, this is one of the traps I kept falling into when I was researching you, is that I would see things like the fact that number 1 Essex is directly across the street from Seward Park. Seward Park was was the very first park in the United States to have a playground for children. And I thought, a man with young kids, maybe that was why you moved there, But as I researched it, I found out that Seward Park was not even in place until like 20 years after you had moved out. And so then the other rabbit hole I fell into was, well, maybe they moved from this house at 1 Essex to Brooklyn because of all the noise of them tearing down everything to make Seward Park. It's difficult on research. You gotta really try not to make facts happen. You just gotta take facts as they come. I don't really know where I was going with that, but
you're probably reading too much into this.
Well, you're probably right. And speaking of reading things into it, it has been speculated that you had other people that worked with you. We know from city directories that not only were you an engraver, but your son, Louis W. Nimschke, was also listed as a die sinker, which is awfully close to being an engraver. And so I don't know what the differentiation would be there, but we know that he was working as well. It is estimated that you engraved 5,000 guns in your lifetime, but I don't know where that number comes from. I don't think it was attributed to you saying it because I can't find any record of you saying anything at all. But that's neither here nor there. In the 1880 census, it shows that one of your neighbors at 1 Essex Street was a man named Julius. It's listed as Mayford in the census, but his actual name is Julius Meffert. Mr. Meffert was from a little town called Suhl in Germany. And when you look up Mr. Meffert further, you find him in Meriden, Connecticut, where the Parker Brothers Firearms and other silver-making companies were based. You also find him in Springfield, living right next door to the armory. I assume he must have worked at Colt at some time. And that just seems like an awful big coincidence that an engraver, a German engraver, from the same area that you learned to engrave from and where all these other engravers were coming from, would be living in an apartment right next to you. So tell me, were you working with Mr. Meffert?
Well, you're making a strong case that we were.
It just makes sense to me that when you look at where he had been and that he was living so closely to you, I don't see how that could possibly be a coincidence. Maybe someday we'll find out the answer to that. Right now, it's only a guess.
So once a Sula, always a Sula.
Okay, folks, sorry to break in again, but we've got to talk a little bit about who might have been involved in Louis Nimschke's workshop. I think it is indisputable that Louis W. was doing work for his father. He was constantly listed as being a die sinker in the city's directories during his life, but he was also listed as being an engraver, and once as being a butter, which I can only assume is fitting buttstocks to firearms. I really don't know. In a newspaper article from 1930 discussing Louis W.'s campaign for the New Jersey House of Representatives, they say he spent his working days as an engraver in the shops of metropolitan silversmiths. I think this tells us what we need to know. He was definitely an engraver. They go on to say that he is a graduate of the Cooper Institute, better known as the Cooper Union, and further that he was running for office as an independent, calling his party the Life-Saving Independent Party. Why life-saving? Well, it seems Louis W. was an inventor as well. He invented a steamer trunk that could be thrown overboard in a disaster at sea, and the trunk would contain all the necessities a shipwrecked person could need. As an aside to this aside, I wonder if his father's troubles at sea caused Louis W. to invent this trunk. Or could it be possible that the 1904 General Slocum steamship disaster, where over 1,000 Germans from the Lower East Side neighborhood perished on their way to Long Island for a picnic? Either way, Louis W. comes across as, at the very least, eccentric. Here's a newspaper clipping where he calls for the shooting of traitorous politicians. He's a very interesting character, and when he died, it was discovered that he had been involved in an old age pension scam when his wife went to collect on the rest of the money. So, that's Louis W. How did his run for office go? Well, the winner got 34,191 votes, and Mr. Nimschke got 17 votes. Another candidate for having worked with Nimschke is his son-in-law, Louis Falk. Falk is listed at times as a lithographer and also as a printer. Is this how he was introduced to the family? I suspect it could have been. Maybe a hey, you should meet my daughter kind of thing. But this is purely speculation. Would a printer and a lithographer necessarily have hand engraving skills? I'm not sure, but the disciplines are close enough that I wouldn't be surprised at all if they did work on some things together. Incidentally, Falk was involved in politics too, as he was a member of the Grover Cleveland Club of Democrats, who were fighting against Tammany Hall at this time. Falk's address is uptown on the other side of Central Park from where the Nimschkes lived, and I wonder if he might have been from a different tax bracket than the Nimschkes. We will come back to Mr. Falk in just a little bit. The final person that I have any proof of working with Nimschke is Julius Meffert. The census found Mr. Meffert living in different cities each time, and always in a city or area that was involved in engraving. He was from Sewell, he was listed as an engraver, and he just happened to live next door to the Nimschkes. I think it's very likely that he worked with Nimschke, but of course I couldn't say for how long. The census only records 1 day out of 10 years. I didn't find any evidence for anyone else, but that doesn't mean that there was no one else. In my opinion, these are the 3 likely candidates.
Well, I thought it was interesting insight into your life. So, and speaking of your life, in 1891, your family packed up and moved to 180 Baltic in Brooklyn. And I had thought, like I said earlier, I'd go down rabbit holes, and I thought, well, I know the Brooklyn Bridge was built about this time. And so I thought, well, maybe they walked down and saw the Brooklyn Bridge and decided to, it was time to pick up and go across the river. But the fact is, this is not actually the same time as the Brooklyn Bridge and that it was built. And you guys could have gone down to the East River on a ferry anytime you wanted to and gone over to Brooklyn. So I did look at where it's located, and 180 Baltic on the map is only 1 block away from DeGraw Street, which was where your wife was living when the 2 of you got married. And I thought, well, perhaps those things are tied together. I have no proof. Could you tell me whether y'all moved to Brooklyn to be closer to somebody from your wife's life?
How could I possibly tell you that?
It's just another mystery, and there's so many mysteries about you. And when everything is just a data point, you have to try to make inferences, and it leaves a lot of gray area. I can say for certain that you moved to 180 Baltic and that you were the owners of that building. So you went from moving to New York at the age of 21, and here we are 40 years later, and you own a building in Brooklyn. So you must have done pretty well for yourself.
Yeah, I pretty much had it going on.
Yeah, I guess so. Actually, I was able to find a lot of newspaper clippings that had to do with this address, and we'll look at some of those. There's even one where a guy got caught stealing a bunch of chickens, and he just happened to live at your address. So anyways, we see from the census that you live there with your wife and your kids, and some of your grandkids even. So that was a lot of people, but there's also newspaper clippings from this time that are advertising for more people to come and live in your house as boarders. So you all were running a secondary business as being a boarding house. The 1900 census showed that 13 people were living in that house, which is really not that big a deal since where you started off living, there might have been 13 people in one apartment. The house at 180 Baltic was 3 stories tall, 25 feet wide by 100 feet long. So plenty of living room there. I guess that's not really a story, but it is something I found out. Not too long after that, I've got some bad news for you.
What's that?
Well, on April 9th, 1904, you died.
No. Just kidding. I knew I was dead.
So you died of something called morbus brighti, which is an old-fashioned catch-all term for inflammation of the kidneys and kidney disease, and also rheumatism. And when I asked my rheumatologist about it, she said that you had lupus. Is that true?
Yeah.
And I asked her, when I found that out, I asked her, so what would that have meant for your life? And it sounds like you would have had complications from lupus your entire life. Does that have anything to do with you not being in military service?
Yeah, it did affect my life, but I can't say about the military service.
Well, she said that you would have had a lot of swelling in your legs and it would have been very painful. And yeah, it sounds like a bad time to me. So I was sad to hear that's what you had. But, we all have something. And April 9th, you died at your home. And you were buried in the Evergreen Cemetery in Brooklyn in the Bethany section. Your house was transferred to your wife's name. The next time the census came out, it listed her name as being Michelle, and I still don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah. Women are mysterious, dude.
If you go looking for Louis Nimschke in the Evergreen Cemetery, you will need to go to the Bethany section and look in plot 1702. But the headstone you see will not read Nimschke, because this plot belongs to Mr. Louis Falk. In this grave, you will find Mr. Falk, Louis D. Nimschke, Wilhelmina Nimschke, and 5 other people who I could name, but because of confusion with how this family reuses names, I can't say for sure if they are Nimschke's daughters or granddaughters. I think both of his daughters are buried with him, but I could be wrong. Also in this cemetery, in the Nazareth lots, you will find Louis W. Nimschke. He's in lot 1539, grave number 1. He is buried with his second wife, and Louis and Louise Louis. I would like to thank the Evergreen Cemetery for helping get this project completed. They were very helpful and nice. I should also mention my rheumatologist said Nimschke had lupus. I guess what I should really say is that if what is reported on Louis' death certificate is correct, that he had 2 things that when added up would amount to lupus. Lupus is rare in men, but that doesn't mean that he didn't have it. Either way, it sounds like his life would have been rather uncomfortable, and the last dated entry into his book is 1898. I'm not saying that there wasn't more recent work than that, but this is the last one that had a date on it. Did Nimschke slow down in his work at the end? I suspect he did. We all do. He lived to be 71 years old, and our bodies don't last forever.
Your wife lived there with your family for a little while longer, and in 1908, she died as well. She died of a stroke, died right there in the house. And as a matter of fact, I don't really want to bring this up because it might sound a bit rude, but maybe it's just the nature of the way records are kept. But so many people died at residences where you had lived that if someone wanted to start a true crime podcast about you secretly being a serial killer, I think it would get a lot of views. I think they could, dig up some stuff on you.
I'd listen to it if you made that podcast.
Well, maybe I'll look into it a little bit more. There's every day there's a more and more records go up online. So maybe someday I can connect all the dots, but maybe it's just a function of the way things were back then. Maybe people died at their house and not in the hospital as much. So that's the end of your story. Like I said, we know about you because your book has come down to us through the ages, and it is a treasure. I love it. I have a copy myself, and I look at it both in real life and online. Looking back on your life, do you have any advice that you would give to young engravers?
Really, you need to start keeping good records.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I guess the other question I would ask, if I'm able to find more information about you and put out a more traditional style documentary, who would you like to have play you in that documentary?
Nick Cage. Guy's amazing.
Well, I have to agree. That'd be pretty great. So, all right. Well, I sure appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. Hopefully I can find out some more information about you in the years to come, and you can come back and talk to me again. So I'm going to let you go.
Thanks, Wade. It was great being here.
All right.
So that's all I found out. I'm not a professional researcher, and so I just did what I could do with the tools I had. I hope that this video will spark someone to follow up on my work and discover even more facts about the life of Louis D. Nimschke. New documents are scanned in every day, and so who knows what we may find out next. I firmly believe that this topic is deserving of a real documentary made by professionals that could take these scraps I've uncovered and really make something of them. The year 2032 will mark 200 years since Nimschke's birth. I hope that I can find some like-minded organizations that would like to see this great engraver's life story be told in a way that befits his place in the history of American engraving. That's it for me, folks. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.